Welcome to Draft Deeper on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed. Thank you so much for tuning in and starting your week with the No Ceilings Collective. My name is Nathan Grubel. You know me as the host of Draft Deeper. Every single Monday, we're coming out with an episode. And joining me tonight, we are without Stephen Gillespie. He is a little under the weather, as I'm sure a lot of us either are or are going to be. It is going to be a brutal winter. I have a feeling with all the different flus and all of those things going around, but nevertheless, he is recovering. We will see him next week on the podcast. But Maxwell Baumbach is back on the show. And Maxwell, you and I were talking just a little bit before we started recording this. This is going to be a spicy episode. I feel like I think there are going to be some divisive takes possibly thrown around. And it's all in good fun, right? We had a massive week of basketball. I think I watched over 30 games this week. So that's quite the grind. It was every day, probably from so Monday we had some games of the Maui Invitational.
Some Maui, yep.
But then like Wednesday through up until today, it's just been a constant nonstop grind with all these fun events. But that's why they call it Feast Week. That's why it's so much fun. And now we get to have the pleasure of recapping some of the biggest storylines. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Yeah, to peel back the curtain a little bit, I help put together like the schedule, like whenever we tweet out games on a day-by-day basis, being like, hey, here's some games to watch tonight. And like last week, I just felt like I was putting in a million games and putting.
Did you just dump a spreadsheet on poor Paige?
Yeah, I kind of did. Well, I just put like check for MTE games every single day and whatever. So I did offload even more of the work onto her, as that's like a thing around here. Like Paige is just she's cleaning up a lot of stuff around here. So I did make her do that. But like this week, I was putting it together for the coming week, and it was like there's some nice games here and there, but just the volume of quality basketball that we got this past week, we're not going to have anything like it for a while. So I enjoyed every second of it. I was up bright and early every single morning getting these games in. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about it. Cause yeah, like you said, there's some really divisive players that we're going to talk about. The take cannon on Twitter has been fired up the last few days, especially around Brandon Miller. We're going to talk about him at some point, but yeah, everyone's getting their takes off, and there's a lot going on. I'm excited to dig in.
Oh, not just at some point, Maxwell. Like we're starting the show with Brandon Miller, and you and I were talking with some of the other guys about who are the featured prospects that we were actually going to write about for No Ceilings this week.
Mm-hmm.
And I fired off the group chat up like somebody's got to write about Brandon Miller. And I thought I was originally going to be writing about Anthony Black, but I think you wanted to write about Anthony Black, which was a perfect pivot for me to be able to write about Brandon Miller again. We know that Albert just wrote about Brandon Miller. He actually has a great piece up right now. You can read it literally right now on No Ceilings before my morning dunk goes live. If you're listening to the podcast a little early in the morning, like Steven does, listening at 4 a.m. whenever these podcast episodes drop. We're just kidding, Steven. But yeah, I feel like we needed to talk about him because all this social media craze. Listen, Corey came in and he published his preseason board. So every time we do like a composite big board on NoCeilingsNBA.com, we put all of our big boards in, we submit one. I'm usually the guy compiling all the results. And we had some discussions about Brandon Miller during the summertime, right? Like Tyler Metcalf was watching some of the exhibition games that he caught his eye. You were talking about Brandon Miller as maybe we should pay a little bit more attention to him. You were high on him. Or
I
at
was
higher.
Eventually. I started low. And then the more I dug into the high school film was what changed it for me. Like I initially, like when I first saw him, I was like, I don't get it. Like this is just a guy who takes mid-range shots, but like is better at defense. Like the comparison I made initially was I was like, are we sure this isn't just like Bryce McGowan's with passing chops? Was like what I first like. That was like my first.
So that's a way to sell me though. That's a way to bring me in because I love Bryce McGowan's. But so okay, so you came up higher on him eventually.
Yeah.
So Corey came in guns hot with his ranking, and he had him like top 5, and I'm like, all right, what am I missing? Because as you've kind of said before, Maxwell, like we're really good at bouncing prospects off of one another. Like if I see something, you might message me and be like, hey, what might I be missing about this guy? Me, vice versa, right? If you have a guy that you've been talking about or following and you write about him, I haven't heard of him or I just haven't seen enough of him, maybe I'll talk to you, be like, what do I need to look out for in this guy? What might I be missing? Usually Corey and I kind of have that similar way that we look at prospects, and usually we either come to an agreement or we might disagree with each other, but neither of us, I feel like, really aren't that far off base with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And Brandon Miller was one of those instances that we actually were very far apart, because I came in, Brandon Miller was probably in like the 20s for me on a preseason board for a number of different reasons that we'll talk about. But Corey had a number 5, and I'm like, holy smokes, what am I missing with this guy? And now we've seen him lace him up for Alabama. We heard some of the preseason buzz, right? Like we all either talk to agents or other scouts or whoever people may be directly, or, some of the chatter ends up making its way in our group chat. We heard all the buzz about Brandon Miller's tearing up for Alabama. Like, this is going to be one of those guys who's going to come out beginning of the year. You're going to regret not having him higher on your board. Pierre, shout out Pee Wee to plug over it through the wire. He was really high on Brandon Miller coming in. I think Rashad was also pretty high, or at least he was talking about some things with Brandon Miller. Like the buzz was out there, but I was skeptical for a few reasons. Now we're technically 7 games into the season after Alabama finally finished that 4 overtime game against North Carolina. Like I feel like right before we recorded the podcast, like that was a rough game. But we're 6 games in for the stats that I'll read off. 20.5 points per game, 9.2 rebounds, 2 assists, 45% from the field, 52.4% from 3-point range, 78% from the line, a 28.7 PER, and a 62 true shooting percentage. Those are some pretty good numbers for a possible NBA prospect.
They're great numbers.
At 6'9", with the size, the length that he has to be able to play out of the wing, possibly slide up, play that small ball 4 spot, he fits the type of mold, the type of archetype that NBA teams are looking for in that position group, right? So you look at the numbers, you look at his measurables, and you're kind of thinking to yourself, well, if he really is shooting the piss out of the ball like that, why don't we have him higher on a draft board? Why isn't he surging up? Then he comes out. Alabama was playing out at the PK85 tournament, and they have a game against Michigan State. He goes absolutely bonkers against Michigan State, 24 points, 9 rebounds, 2 blocks, to which point it wasn't just scouts or fun guys like you and I coming out on Twitter and saying like, oh, Brandon Miller, like top 5, Brandon Miller, top 6. Kevin O'Connor comes out all of a sudden is like, Brandon Miller, he's a beast, 3rd overall on my board. And I'm like, wow, so we're really going to do this right now, aren't we? Like, we have to have the Brandon Miller conversation, because there's some positives, Maxwell, that I want you to talk about as somebody who has ended up being higher on him, but there are some negatives. Like, there are some real flaws
negatives. Yes,
well.
And those have come out the last 2 days.
So
apparently.
Why don't you talk about what you've seen over the last week with Brandon Miller and kind of how you're sitting with him right now before I go into some of my thoughts?
Yeah, so he was 5 for me coming into the week. I think he's still in that range. Like, I have no doubt in my mind that, like, at this stage in the process, he's clearly a top 10. And I want to get this out of the way first. I think there's a lot of people talking past each other with Brandon Miller. Like, I think it's just the worst conversation I've seen in some time around Brandon Miller, where everyone is like, oh, like he's great. Like, no, he sucks, like whatever. And like, the one thing, because I think it was Steven that I asked somebody on Twitter, it's like, okay, well, who are you putting ahead of him? Like, if he's so bad, like who are you putting? Here's what I like about Brandon Miller. My concern coming into college with him was it is a very mid-range heavy shot diet that he showcased, particularly in the EYBL film. I do think that he is really proving that he can shoot threes at this stage. So he's 6'9". He is hunting the pull-up 3 at times.
Yeah, trying to prove might be a little too nice, Maxwell, because 50% of his shot attempts have been from 3-point range before today's game. So,
but like on paper, wouldn't you rather have that than like this guy who just chucks in the middle?
Oh, absolutely,
a lot.
Absolutely,
like,
yeah.
So to me, it's a positive development, even if it's a little much. But he's capable of hitting deep threes. A lot of these are NBA range threes. He hit something in the Michigan State game with a hand in his face from deep Hauser, who's like he's not a small guy. Like he's
No.
not a great defender, but if he's closing out on you with a hand in his face and you're hitting a 3 over him, that means
I think he's the same height as Brandon Miller, right? Is Hauser 6'9"? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I believe 6'9", 6'10", somewhere in that range. To stay with the offense, I think his passing is solid. It's not like true point forward passing at this point, but I do think he processes the game pretty well and has a solid understanding of his leverage. I think defensively, there's a lot to really enjoy, because I think the thing that has thrown me off the most, and I'm interested to see if you're coming from a different place on this, I really like him defensively. Like, I think he slides and stays big really well. I think that he knows his scouting report off the ball in particular. Like, I feel like he's never sagging too far off of a shooter. There are times where if he knows that the guy's picked up his dribble and he's on a shooter, he'll really work to deny his man the ball and prevent him from getting the ball in that sort of a situation. There's been good instances of him getting really skinny around screens. I feel like he's fairly disciplined about when he leaves his feet, but when he does, he recovers really well. So I really like what I'm seeing from him on the defensive end. Like, there are a lot of freshmen that come into college and people are like, oh yeah, like great defender. And then you dig into the tape and it's like, it's more like theoretical. Like, the tools are there and they can do some stuff, but it's not consistent. I feel like the consistency of his defense has been solid. Or do you agree with that? Or
so we've talked multiple times about the help defense, the help stuff around the basket. Like, I think that's been phenomenal. His ability to, or I shouldn't say ability, he has the ability, but really the desire to get out in the break and chase down guys for those blocks. Like, that's been really impressive. I like a lot of those things.
Communication is really good too.
Communication's fantastic.
He's always talking.
I think his anticipation is good. I think he sees things. He sees the floor well. That goes into some of the passing things that you talked about, right? Like, I'd say he's do we want to call him a good passer? I think average is probably appropriate, like right now, right? Like, he does the things that I think we want him to do in that regard. I don't know if I call him a good passer yet, but
I'd say good for his size. Like, I think if you line up with the prospects who are his height in this draft, he's going to be higher on that scale. But he's not like a point forward or anything. Like, I think
I agree. Yeah,
a bridge too far.
I can rock with that. So you kind of see those things coming together on the defensive side. What I'm concerned about with him defensively is, and I wrote a little bit of this in my column that's going to publish. I said, out on the perimeter, Miller's shortcomings are more pronounced, but I don't think he's been terribly bad. On the ball, it's clear that he's not the fleetest of foot. When he gets beat on drives and in screen and roll situations, Miller looks as though he anticipates his man's move and can recover off a counter and drive with his length. But when he does get beat and he has to settle for a hard foul, that's an issue, right?
And that popped
we saw that today.
Yeah. It did.
So that's like my biggest concern, right? Like, we want to project him as this 1 through 4 really switchable, really versatile defender, which in theory it works, but when he gets beat, it looks really bad. And that's the issue. And that's the one part. So the comp that's going to come out a lot with Brandon Miller is a lot of the stuff with Jabari Smith last year,
which like there's so man,
it's going to come up on both sides of the ball. On defense, Brandon isn't the type of perimeter defender that I think Jabari was
not even
last
close.
year.
Yeah,
and that's really the shortcoming. But I think overall, I'm with you. I like the defense. I don't love it, but I do like it. And when you can combine that with some of the other things that we can talk about with him offensively, there is a package there to where he becomes the modern forward that we do think he can be just by looking at the numbers or looking at the measurables. There are things there. Defensively, I think was a little bit of my mixed bag. So there were 3 concerns that I had coming into the season, right? Number one, I did want to see how a lot of the defense translated, given that, as we've talked about, he was playing a different role in high school than he would be in college. In high school, he was the de facto 5, the primary rim protector a lot for his high school team. Now he's going to have to play more out covering on the wing or out kind of covering and closing out the corner shots a lot more often, right? Like the different role. How is he going to fare? How is his mobility going to look? The other concern was the shooting. You talked about his mid-range shot diet. Now it seems as though he's gone in the opposite direction. He is still perimeter based, but now it's all behind the 3-point line, which is good when he's making them But why is he living on those 3-point shots? And that brings us to the ultimate concern that has still not been answered. So today, he was 2 of 13 on shots against North Carolina from inside the arc. Maxwell, that's not going to get it done. And
No.
there's going to be some talk about some of the guards on his team and the mix in the offense, especially late in the game. Like, I understand all of that. I don't disagree with any of that. But all through the first half into, I want to say, like the 12, 11-minute mark in the second half, he had the ball in his hands a lot where he could do stuff within the offense. He was bringing the ball up the floor. He was initiating stuff. He had every single opportunity to sort of prove the quote-unquote doubters wrong, that he was going to be more of a threat driving, getting to the basket, and actually finishing at the rim. And through 7 games now, he just has not been able to do it. He doesn't get off the floor. He's not explosive. I think some of the stuff I've seen online, and I'm sure you have as well, because you talked about it, the discourse around Brandon Miller, there are some great things to point out, but a lot of the discourse actually hasn't been great in the community so far. I think some of the stuff that he can't get by anybody, that's overblown. As I think
I agree.
He's gotten by people, but it's more so the explosion.
I agree. And I think a lot of people in the draft sphere overvalue explosiveness. And I'm not saying it's not a good thing to have, or that it's not important. But I think
you need it if you're like a 6'4" guard and under. At this point, you have to have it. But there are a lot of
great players that need a screen. There's a lot of exceptional NBA players that aren't super explosive or use screens more often to compensate for the fact that they're not super explosive, and are legitimate star players on max contracts. So I don't think that's like a nail in the coffin that he's not blowing by everybody.
Mm-hmm.
What is a big concern is the fact that through those 6 games, sitting here, he was at 38.1% on twos, which it's rough. It's rough. It's definitely not good. To me, the biggest concern is not even like getting to his spots, because I think he can work on ways to do that. I don't think I've seen people call like his handle mediocre. I think his handle's like, again, like for his size, not bad. I think there's some stuff he can do footwork wise. I also am like and I hate that I'm like, somebody said this, and I think that but another knock I've seen on him is like his functional strength, which is somebody who is like big into fitness and weightlifting. Everybody can improve. If you do the right things, I have no doubt he can become functionally stronger. And if you talk to people, skills trainers, people that work in the NBA, they will tell you the same. They do not mind if somebody is not NBA strong out of the gates. Being 6'9", is it a bigger concern? 100%. I think footwork wise, there's a lot that needs to change, but it's really just like how he handles contact that to me is the biggest, like, oh brother, like, it reminds me a lot of, and this is somebody else who I loved as a prospect and still am like on the bandwagon of today, and Moses Moody, where like there would be plays where he would get to the rim and meet somebody and he would just shrivel. And that kind of stuff can't happen because you're diminishing your own touch. You're reducing the likelihood of a foul being called. And like, he's done a decent job of getting to the line, but like, he's just got to get to a place. I don't know if it's a mental thing, a strength thing, or whatever, where like he is willing to go into that contact. We talked about it with the difference between Amen and Asor Thompson, where like Asor is just willing to buck up and deal with the contact around the basket. And that to me is like my big concern with Brandon Miller. It's just like, can you embrace and finish through that contact? Because the lack of elevation and the way that he's just handling that contact is very frustrating right now.
So I agree with you 100%. The whole getting to his spots thing, he does get to his spots. And you want to know why I know he gets to his spots? You don't even need a ton of the tape to figure out the why. You can look at some of the free throw attempt numbers, and over the last, 5 games, 6 games, he's getting the line, right? He's getting the line 5 or more times a game. So that tells me he's able to get to the basket. The problem is when he's not bailed out by the whistle, there's nothing else really going in. And he had a great and one finish in the Michigan State game. He's had some of those, but when we talk about an overall body of work, it's to me, I don't even know if it's as much the strength, Maxwell, the man just doesn't get up off the floor. Like that to me is an even bigger issue. Like, so I can specifically talk about a 2-on-1 fast break today in the North Carolina game where he could have passed it to, I forget who the guard was running with him in the other lane, but he could have passed it to that guard. He decided to keep the ball, which was fine. I think a lot of the other forwards were looking at his size in this draft class. He was going up against the guard on that drive on the break in the 2-on-1. They would have hammered it home over that guard, and Brandon Miller couldn't do it. Brandon Miller actually had to get bailed out by the whistle on that play because he couldn't finish the and one in that situation. So we're not even talking about a drive in the half court where there's like 2 or 3 guys around him who are trees that he doesn't have the strength to finish through. We're talking about this being issue against smaller guards, people who are significantly like 4 to 5 inches smaller than him. That's an issue. Like that lack of touch, that lack of ability to get up off the ground. That is a real thing, that if people are going to keep singing that criticism about his game, they probably shouldn't harp on it as much as they should, but it is a real issue.
And I wonder, I know nothing about biomechanics, but I wonder if like somebody who does could like explain some of this to me too, because I do feel like there have been times where I've seen him like really get up for a rebound, and then conversely, like there are times where it just seems like, like he's got his feet stuck in the sand.
It's the 2 foot versus the 1 foot. In reality, yes.
And that was another thing that people knocked Jabari Smith for, like early on during the last draft cycle when he was breaking out, is that like he doesn't get up that well off of one a lot. And I felt like even throughout the last season, he got a little bit better with that. Like I remember there was one play in particular where he took off on the baseline last year and tried to get off of one, and he got like brutally fouled. But before he got to the rim, like the jump looked good. So maybe there are some tweaks that he can make, but it is
like GG Jackson would have hammered that ball home today. Like that wouldn't have even been a discussion. That would have been like a Sports Center top 10 possible highlight, right? And for Brandon Miller, it was a struggle, and he needed to get to the line to bring something away from that play. So that, all of that aside, I do like a good amount of what I've seen from him. I like anybody who's that big, who's that tall, who can create their own shot from the perimeter, who wants to be aggressive, right? It's not like he doesn't want the moment. This guy wants to be the offense for his team. There are just some things that he's not good at right now. Does he need to improve at some of these things? Yes, he does. Will he improve at some of these things? I don't have an answer for that question. I don't know if he's going to improve some of these things that he needs to work on at the rim. Like I said, we should probably have somebody on the show who is much more fluid in the biomechanics and all of those types of things. Yeah, that is not my bag. We are. Yeah, it's not my bag either. But those are the concerns that we have, and it comes back to, so he's taking a lot of these jump shots because I think he knows there are just certain situations where he shouldn't drive at the basket. Or the other thing that I talk about all the time, and we've talked about it with Jaquavion Smith, the angles taking to get to the basket. If he doesn't have that explosive first step to come out a little wide and actually get the right angle to go to the rim, he's going to be coming in tight, which makes it a lot easier for somebody else to come over and help and rotate in front of him. And if that big body's in front of him, we just talked about how somebody who's 5 inches smaller than him can be a problem. If you make it any easier for that big body to come over and rotate and challenge that shot, that just makes it so much harder for him to finish in these traffic situations. So that all that aside though, right? The production has clearly been there. He's had some big moments. That Michigan State game was a signature performance. We talk with these prospects. We want to see these signature performances regardless of where they're playing. The best prospects always have them. He has a few of them already. He has a 28-point performance. He has that 24-point performance against Michigan State. The highs look high, but the lows, because of the lows, I can't get there as high as some of you guys are with Brandon Miller. I can't get there to just automatically shoot him up into the top 5 or the top 6 on my board. Can I ask you a question that I know I didn't prepare you for? I'm going to catch you really off guard here.
Let's do it.
You think you're keeping Brandon Miller top 5 on your board. But if I had to ask you between these two players, who would you actually rather have? Brandon Miller or GG Jackson? Who would you pick?
I would still pick Brandon Miller at this stage. I see the vision from your side for sure. Because I think with GG, I think he profiles better athletically. And he's much younger, like 2 years younger. I think with Gigi, what I'm still a little hung up on is like the assist numbers, like the passing
Okay.
feel in particular, just like isn't there to a degree. And I think part of that might just be him like settling into the college game.
He's starting to run some pick and roll though, man. It's
yeah,
starting to
yeah.
get scary hours down in South Carolina.
For sure. And he's a guy too where like I didn't dig super deep into the high school film on him. And I kind of want to because I want to know how much of that is just him like still getting used to the speed of the college game. Because if it is and like the high school passing looks good, I'd be more willing to go out on a limb on him. But yeah, at this stage, I'm still Brandon Miller. I am never married to my rankings this early in the season. Like I will say, if by the end of the year, if he's like 12 or something like that, I wouldn't be shocked. I still just have a hard time, given the feel, size, and perimeter shot making, seeing him falling out of the lottery. Like I think that's hard for me to imagine. I see where you're coming from. I respect the question. If you have Gigi higher, I'd get it. But I'm just a little more comfortable with what I've seen from Miller so far, especially against good competition, because a lot of these GG games too have not come against the best squads. The Clemson game was good, match with PJ Hall, who's like a real deal guy, but
he's got a game against Georgetown coming up, which Georgetown's not lighting anybody on fire necessarily either, but that will be another, I think, good test for him. And then the most interesting matchup with Gigi I'm waiting for is the Imani Bates and Gigi Jackson showdown that's coming.
That's so exciting.
In between Christmas and New Year's. I'm waiting for that game. I can't wait to see that one. I don't have an answer for you. I was just kind of curious to see where your headspace was at. You say fall out of the lottery. The both of them are in the lottery for me.
Oh yeah,
that's not up for debate.
The fact that like Gigi, like I don't think it's appreciated enough that Gigi like has not been a disaster. Like the fact that he's actually playing good basketball, like it's like legitimately a miracle. Like I was expecting Gigi to like be bad in college, and he was still going to be like top 15 as long as he didn't like take a dump on the court. Like I was so intrigued with him as a player, and the fact that he's playing good basketball, I don't think is getting enough attention. Like I've seen him so far down people's boards, and I'm like, I don't know. This is such a jump in competition for somebody his age, and he's handling it so well.
So if anybody out there just listens to the Draft Deeper podcast and they aren't tuning into all the other episodes of the No Ceilings NBA feed, first of all, how dare you? You should be listening to all of our wonderful shows. But I had Keandre from Hoop and Elect on the Home and Away episode that I got to host for the collective, and we talked about Gigi Jackson. And my reservation with Gigi, the talent is ridiculous. I want to have him stupendously high on my board. And I think when we do a big board update, I may very well have Gigi Jackson higher than Brandon Miller. My only reservation, though, with drafting a player that high is usually when you're drafting a player that high, it means the team that he's going to isn't the greatest situation. That could be for a variety of different things. It could be an honest rebuild for a good organization who actually develops players really well. But there's instances like Marvin Bagley to the Sacramento Kings, for example, where this guy had, in my opinion, he had a lot of talent, but he was nowhere close to being any sort of finished product. And there was a lot of the development that needed to be finished. And he went to an organization that wasn't going to develop him and have a specific path set out in front of him. And with Gigi Jackson, he's doing all of these different fun things on the court. Brandon Miller, he's doing a lot of the same fun things too, right? That's why the conversation's valid. But with Gigi, I love when you use the phrase exploring the studio space. He is absolutely doing that, but I don't quite feel that there's a specific plan with some of the things that he does on the court, nor do I know if the coaching staff has a specific plan for him right now. And then you take that to the NBA, and if there is no real developmental track for him, I just wonder what type of disaster that could possibly turn into, because that can happen with even the most talented of players, right? If they don't have a role that they can grow into, he's coming in, he wants to be this jumbo wing, this jumbo big, like I'm just going to take all of these step back threes. I'm going to pull up for all these jump shots. I'm not always going to do the things that your typical forward prospect would do, which is fine. I do like the experimentation, but Brandon Miller, if you're going to make an argument for Brandon Miller, he knows who he is, and there are some things that he needs to work on, but you know the type of player you're getting right off the bat. when you're talking about drafting one of the Thompson twins, and you're talking about drafting like a Gigi Jackson, there are more questions around their development that I think we have answers for right now. So maybe that's just another reason why you would take a Brandon Miller higher and put him higher on your board. I don't know where you're at with sort of that whole discourse.
Yeah, well, I think an argument that could easily be made in the favor of Gigi there is the idea that, like, if you're worried about throwing him on a rebuilding team that doesn't have talent around him and like seeing where that leads, like we're seeing
He's
it
on
right
South
now.
Carolina.
We're
right
seeing
now.
it right now with like Michi Johnson just chucking threes and like Hayden Brown playing old man ball at the elbow. Like that's their team. So I don't know. It wouldn't dissuade me personally. I think my biggest reservation is still just going to be the feel and like, can he play make for others and get a little better at like reading the game and knowing like, hey, nothing's here right now, so I'm going to kick it out. Like that's the sort of stuff I want to see as the year goes on.
I can't wait to compare our big boards with Steve in one of these episodes we will do in the coming weeks when we can actually get all three of us back on a podcast episode together. But we'll move on. So we covered Brandon Miller pretty in depth. You and I still have questions that need answers, and we will just see how more of the season plays out. Hopefully, he does not throw up too many more stinkers from an efficiency standpoint, like he did against North Carolina. Don't get me wrong. Like he did things in the North Carolina game that were good, right? Like he certainly had moments. I was pleasantly surprised and will continue to be pleasantly surprised with how much that team actually trusts him to have the ball in his hands, right? Like that's more of what I want to see from Brandon Miller. But yeah, 4 of 20 were from the field. We got to have a better game than that, bud. We just need to see more consistency on that front. Somebody who was consistent over his last few games, you are writing about Anthony Black this week, Maxwell. So I won't take up too much of the airspace on this pod in relation to him. I actually want you to be able to give your open and free thoughts, given that he is going to be the featured prospect on the prospect overview. But his Maui run, man, holy crap. Like wow. I was watching those games and I'm like, I really think I need to write about Anthony Black. And even in the quote unquote worst game for him was against San Diego State in their last game. He was only 3 of 11 from the field, 3 of 9 on twos, but he was still 9 of 10 from the free throw line.
Yep.
Was very willing to get to the line, 15 points, 5 rebounds. But games before that, 26 points and 6 assists in games against Louisville. And then against one of the best teams we have in the country in Creighton. Like this man, we kind of see him as like a connector type, I think is what we wanted to call him before the year started, Maxwell. But now we have real examples on film. This dude is willing to do whatever he needs to do to help his team win a basketball game. And if he needs to go in a takeover mode, damn it, he's going to do it, and he's going to do it well.
Yeah.
I have not been more impressed by a prospect over the last week and a half than I have been by Anthony Black. And I can 100% assure you, I don't know who I will have to kick out. He's going to be in the top 10 on my board. And I don't think at this point I don't think it's too much of a discussion. I'm curious to see where you're at, given you're writing about him and your whole takeaway from the last week. But I don't think that's much of a discussion. I want to hear where you're at.
Yeah, I'm in a real similar place as you. So to kind of start off and give some background, if people missed the preseason preview episodes, something that I had kind of raised as a concern with Anthony Black was this idea that he is this big attacker at 6'7". And Arkansas, outside of him, was really kind of short on perimeter shooting. Yep. And it was Ricky Council and nobody else that really had a proven track record of knocking down outside threes at a good clip. And I had raised the point that, like, look, I think you take a player like this in the first round no matter what. Somebody who's 6'7", that kind of athleticism, that kind of field, the defensive acumen, those guys succeed. You take them in the first round, even if the college season isn't good. That's what it looked like was going to happen those first 3 games. He was rough out there. It was the Anthony Black struggle bus. I think through those first 3 games, he was scoring 6 points per game, 33% from the field, 25% from 3. But there was still some good stuff. Yeah, there was still some good stuff. There was 3 steals a game, 0.7 blocks. And granted, these are against all low major schools, but it's something that the defense was there, but boy, was the offense looking rough.
It's also like that whole Arkansas team. You talked about the lack of shooting, the lack of chemistry, period. It's like they're rolling out a whole new squad. And so he's the type of guy he's going to want to run the show, but he also has to figure out where everybody else likes the ball. When are going to be his times to take over within the flow of the offense? How does all of this look like without arguably their best player on the team in Nick Smith Jr.? Like, how are all these pieces going to come together? So to your point, there were some struggles, but those were to be expected because he had to figure out a lot of what this was going to look like before one of the bigger events in the early year in the Maui Invitational.
Yeah, so Maui arrives and he goes nuts and scores 22 points per game, 60% on 10 twos per game, gets to the line 7.3 times per game, 86% on his free throw. So the touch is very encouraging there. Makes 40% of his threes in Maui, 4.3 assists, getting it on the glass, grabbing almost 5 rebounds a game, getting a bunch of steals. Like, he's the guy. He comes out of Maui getting the Titus and Tate, as they call it, the Maui bump. Anthony Black gets the Maui bump in draft circles. He looked absolutely phenomenal. And I love his game and I love his aggressiveness. Especially when we're talking offense and hunting in general. He is playing at multiple speeds, which I think is something that I was really excited to see from him.
Yes.
Because he is so explosive. And when you are that type of athlete and you can turn the corner on guys like he can, it's really tempting to just try and do that all the time. But
which he did. He did at different times in some of these games, right?
When it was there, he was doing it.
He self-corrected though. He adjusted.
Yeah.
Exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, when it's time, he'll use a hostage dribble. He'll keep a guy on his tail. If he's got a smaller guy on him, he has no problem just keeping him on his hip. And same thing too, or if he's just like on an island against a smaller guy, he'll go through him. He doesn't care. He's going to eat that mismatch every single time. His eyes for the weak side corner are outstanding.
Yep.
Like situations where teams are overhelping off that weak side corner and he can just sling it there out of his dribble with his right hand. Really great stuff that you like to see. There were some issues here and there, I thought, with his ball handling. Like, all of his turnovers, it felt like, came on instances where he played the pick and roll a little too slow and he was just kind of waiting on things to shake out and a defender could kind of got into his handle. But all in all, this is a guy who creates with a purpose. He's looking to get downhill, but he's not forcing it, and he keeps his head up the whole time. And the biggest thing that I am thrilled with from an offensive development standpoint is that if you give him space, he will shoot. He's going to keep the defense honest. I don't necessarily buy the three. I certainly don't think it's going to be the 40% he hit in Maui. If you look at the synergy numbers, a lot of these shots are unguarded that he's getting from three, but they were running their double horn set at the top where defenses were really sagging on him. And he would shoot the three there. Guys would go way under on handoffs and he would take those. He had some really bad misses in there, but the bottom line is he is shooting when given the space. And if he can just keep the defense honest like that, it forces defenses to play up on him. That's where the speed comes into play. That's where the precision comes into play. And it just opens up everything else for his offensive game. So that's the big offensive part for me. So I want to kind of bounce it back to you and see where you were at just on the offensive side of the ball with him.
And exactly. So he needs to be able to bring defenses out so where he can turn the corner, get somebody on his hip, which, by the way, you talked about it. He already does that pretty decently now. He's listed at 6'7", 198 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
I think his body can keep filling out. Like, I think he can
easily,
get up to like 215. And once he starts getting up in that weight range, right, he's going to be a lot stronger like 2, 3, 4 years from now. He's going to be a problem to deal with because he's 6'7", because he has length, because he's always able to see over the top of the defense. So now if he can take on who's in front of him, right, get by who's in front of him and keep those other guys behind him, what's the defense going to be able to do if he's able to take the space, right? Maybe hit some pull-up jump shots in time, maybe get to the floater in the paint, like, and then obviously when he gets all the way to the rim, he can get up there. He's explosive. He can get up off one and hammer it home. Mm-hmm. What are defenses going to be able to do to him from a scoring perspective? And oh, by the way, you mentioned the corner kickouts, the reads out of pick and roll, the pocket passes. Like, this man has every single pass that I want to see from a point guard in the book.
Yeah.
And he's dropping Maxwell. He's dropping them on a dime. Like, how many errant passes is he honestly throwing through these first 6 games? Like, there's a few.
Yeah.
There's a few that you can point out, but really not too many when he's a freshman coming in, playing, especially in Maui. First game, 35 minutes played, 38 minutes played, 39 minutes played. This guy is quite literally playing the entire game, and he's not showing signs of being too tired to finish out those games and helping his team get the win. His passes are still on a dime. He's still being attentive. He's still being aggressive, hunting for his own shot. And then he's also playing, I won't say spectacular defense, but I think it's been pretty freaking good. Right?
Yeah.
Like he is at least engaged and locked in the entire time. He can play up at the point of attack. There are still some things I want to see him get better at away from the ball. But for a freshman guard, I do think his defense has been pretty dang good. And now we're talking about the type of two-way package that can come in and impact the game from day one in the NBA at his size. Just the way that the game's going, Maxwell, like those are my thoughts. I don't see what NBA team wants to pass on the type of package that he is if the perimeter shooting is consistent enough like it has been over the last few games. So I guess the question for us to answer would be, can he sustain at least a good portion of what he's shown over these Maui games? I think my answer is yes. What would be your answer?
Yeah, I think he will. I think he's going to have a legitimately good season, because I don't think you have 3 games like that against teams that caliber. Like, well, I mean, Louisville, but
Creighton and San Diego State, though,
like
those are real teams.
In a San Diego State team where the average age of the players is 35 years old is very impressive to me. That is a very experienced.
You mean 25?
Team. No, 35. Matt Bradley has been in school since the mid 2000s at this point, I believe. But
that was a joke that I didn't pick up on. Oh my goodness. That's
no,
draft deeper for you in a nutshell.
Yeah, they're an old team, bottom line. But so like when you're dealing with an experienced rim protector like like Mensa on their team, and you're still like holding your own and not being intimidated and getting to the basket and using creative passing angles to get around somebody that size, like that speaks volumes about just where he's at as a player. And the willingness to get to the free throw line is huge, especially if he's going to keep hitting free throws like this. So, and if I know the rims in Maui are soft or whatever, but the fact that he was getting to the line and hitting them like that is super, super encouraging. I think one thing I love about the defense is his hand speed is outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
He reads the game so quickly. There was a play, I believe it was in the San Diego State game, it might have been the Louisville game, where he stole an inbound pass that they tried to throw over him. That was like the silliest play I've ever seen, where like you just immediately was like, oh, you're trying to throw this over me. And his hands just shot up at work.
I remember the pass.
And he took the ball. And like, you just don't see plays like that happen ever. So that was like one of my favorite highlights, but he's so good at just catching, like, that guy's dribbling. He's not good at dribbling and he's not paying attention. And I'm just going to go nab it real quick.
Yeah.
And he's able to spring back into position so quickly because of his quickness. Really like the tools on defense. There are some things that I'm not crazy about defensively, just little things that I think part of it's going to come with just maturity and experience and playing at this level more and knowing what you can and can't get away with when you're playing against better players. But all in all, like the whole package is really good. And I think with his instincts, there's chances it could get a lot better. Like just the way that he sees the game, like, would you be surprised if he develops to be, because he isn't yet, but if he develops into being like a really meaningful weak side rim protector over time, given like what he's able to do, or if he can be just a reliable 3-point shooter, what that's going to open up for him is a cutter. Like there's all these little things where it's like, these are things that aren't the main concern right now, but if he just keeps getting better, they're well within reach. And I think that is where it's easy to get really excited about what he can become.
Just the last thing I'll say about his offensive game. I talked about he has all the different types of passes in the book. It's one thing to be able to throw a bounce pass at a certain speed or deliver it in a certain location, but the timing on those passes as well, right? He was doing some slick dump off passes in Maui where if he would have done them at the wrong time, they would have been really easily intercepted and the ball would have been going the other way. It would have been a live ball turnover. But because of the timing that he had on some of those dimes, they ended up being 2 points for his team. And that, I can't stress that enough. It's not just the speed and the location of passes, but it's about when you actually want to get the ball in those narrow windows. Timing is everything, especially when you get to the NBA, because defenders are a lot quicker. They're a lot more instinctual. Like those types of passes that are thrown, not paying attention to the proximity of certain defenders and when you need to throw them, they will be picked off incredibly easily. You will see your turnovers pile up and your coach will be pissed off at you. So that I don't have to worry about that with Anthony Black, whether he is the primary ball handler, whether he is getting involved in a cutting action and he has to redirect the ball somewhere else. I don't have any of those worries about him. I love Anthony Black. I think he's going to be a spectacular NBA player, and I want to continue to watch him on this Arkansas team, especially when he does have somebody like Nick Smith Jr. to help that bailout offense, right? Where Anthony Black doesn't have to be the bailout shot maker. It can be somebody else. I can't wait. Our Arkansas, man, they're one of the most fun teams we have in the country. I'm so glad that we got to see them on like a national type stage in Maui. That was exciting. So another team that always has the national spotlight, no matter where they are. The Duke Blue Devils, of course. This afternoon, we had the 4 overtime thriller between North Carolina and Alabama. That was on ESPN. Duke and Purdue was, of course, on ABC. We know who the moneymaker is in college basketball. It's the Duke Blue Devils. We all know it. They've had a really interesting story keep developing with their team. Now, today's game, again, a little bit notwithstanding, although he certainly wasn't bad. But really, it's been about what he was doing before this game. Kyle Filipowski is soaring, and I mean soaring, up draft boards. And when I use the word soaring or surging in the case of Brandon Miller, I mean it quite literally with Filipowski, because I struggled with ranking him inside the top 45 before the preseason started.
I was in that same boat.
And it wasn't that I didn't see the offensive skill. I think we all on this podcast actually acknowledged the offensive skill when we talked about him, but I wanted to see what it looked like in college. Was this going to be a Matthew Hurt type of situation where he was going to be this guy who lived behind the three-point line, who could sometimes create some sort of his own offense, but at the end of the day, he was getting played off the floor in other respects because the defense was just that poor? Or was he going to be one of these reliable 7-foot stretch bigs who could also offer some sort of defensive impact? Was he going to be rebounding the ball at a high level? What type of offensive actions would you be able to use him in? And he has answered all of those questions with a resounding yes. Kyle Filipowski should be taken seriously, not just as a first rounder, but by the numbers, really should be looked at with a top 20 grade. And I think today I'm probably sitting here as by the next time I update my big board, I'm probably going to have Kyle Filipowski in the top 20. He is certainly not a perfect prospect. There are plenty of defensive shortcomings that we can still talk about. However, I do think when he's had to play on the ball or when he's had to recover in certain situations, like just around the basket, like I'm talking like when he's had to make a quick recovery from like the foul line coming back towards the basket to help, I think he's been able to do those things. I think he's been able to defend off the ball to an extent. In the post, when he has a big man going up against him, I would obviously like for him to be a better rim protector in that sense, be able to block those shots and not just allow some of those post-up makes to go in. He hasn't been as poor in space as I thought he would be, though.
I'm with you there.
He has not been barbecue chicken in space. So I do love that aspect of his game. And then when you throw in all the fun things he's doing offensively from a scoring perspective, I mean, shit, Max, what do you want? You want post scoring? Check. You want a face-up game? Check. 3-point shooting, pick and roll, pick and pop offense, all of those things checks. And then when he does get the ball, he can redirect. He has the vision to be able to redirect the ball and make some pretty awesome passes in doing so. Now, I don't love his passing touch. I think there are certainly times where he passes the ball away from his man. Like he will see things incredibly well, and he will make some passes where I'm like, yeah, if he got the ball in this situation in the NBA, he would have to be able to make that pass. That's great. He recognizes he does. He just throws the ball away from some of his guys, or throws it too high or too low, a little too much for my liking to put him in more of a higher usage passing role. but the fact that he can do a lot of those things and he has those vision out of double teams when he comes off and he tries to take the ball to the basket, he can get the ball away when he needs to. I like seeing that. That's great. The shooting, I do love the shooting. He gets to the line at a really high rate. He makes his free throws at a really high rate. I think more of the jump shooting is going to come around. I'm listing off more positives than negatives, Maxwell, and I think you're probably going to do the same thing in talking about Filipowski.
Yeah.
Where are you at with him right now?
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat. I've been really impressed with what I've seen. And one of the notes that I had from his high school tape was that even though he can be a little too upright on the perimeter, but he is fluid and he changes direction well. Mm-hmm. And I think that is like the biggest thing that has helped him on the perimeter, is that if you throw a counter at him, he's not like a giraffe on roller skates. Like, he's not going to completely fall apart and like be unable to handle himself. He's able to just like stick with guys fairly well. I'm a little more concerned about some of the offensive scoring stuff, I think. In
what way?
I'm not crazy about how he finishes through contact.
Agreed.
I think he needs to be stronger with the ball in every sense.
Agreed.
I also am like, I felt like the early games I watched, he was just like never hitting important threes, and then he was making them in garbage time. Like the Delaware game, I thought he like hit too late, where I was like, I don't know, like to me it was a little too much like a guy hitting a home run, like when the game is like well put away. So I want to see what the jump shot looks like in conference before I'm like totally sold on it. But the things I like a lot. I love the work rate on offense. I love that he's doing something all the time. He can stay in motion, play at a high pace, gets really involved on the glass on both ends. The way that he is operating out of his face up is very impressive to me. And I like the fact that he is putting traditional big men in really uncomfortable predicaments. Like if a big man does a traditional big man style closeout on him, he can pump fake and take him off the dribble. And I wasn't positive that was going to be there coming in. Like it was something that you saw in the high school tape, and it's like, I don't know that this is going to work at the next level. And it is. Mm-hmm. So I think that to me has been the most encouraging development, and how he can use that to get to the free throw line and things like that. I think I might like the passing a little bit more than you do. I agree that it's not always accurate, but that was also a big criticism I had with Victor early on too. And I wonder how much that is just acclimating to the speed.
No, it's always more important to be able to recognize where and when you should pass the ball than like the delivery is something you can work on. I agree with
you. So I do just want to see him be a little bit more efficient in general. I want to see him not have to get his own rebound a little bit more. I'd like to see him the jump shot is just like a whole season thing. Like I just want to see where that ends up at the end of the year. But yeah, I'm way, way more interested than I anticipated being going into the season, especially this early on.
So the biggest knock that I would have on him right now, you talked about some of the jump shooting. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of his finishing around the basket is leaving a little bit to be desired. Now I listed off, he is very capable of scoring out of the post. He is very capable of catching the ball on the move and getting to the basket. And like he's capable of these things. He's just not doing them at an efficient rate for a 7-footer. So I tweeted about this. Mark Schindler and I were having a conversation on Twitter, and I tweeted this out. So he's a high volume, low efficiency big when it comes to the 2-point percentages, when it comes to some of the shaky jump shooting, but he gets to the line a lot. He makes the free throws a lot, and he rebounds the absolute hell out of the ball. Yeah, particularly on the offensive end, certainly on the defensive end. All right. So when I present that package in front of you, it should remind you of a certain player that you and I watch all the time.
I know where you're going with this, and I can't.
So
let the audience know.
I'm not making the one-to-one comparison. That's not what I'm doing. But just in terms of the production itself that we're seeing at Duke, some Joel Embiid stuff going on here. And you knew that's where I was going to go. I almost made you spit out your drink. But
yeah.
That's what we watch all the time with Joel Embiid. Like, this is amazing. Yeah. He struggles to finish above 50% on all of his field goal attempts, right? He can make threes, but he doesn't make them at a high clip. He lives at the line. He absolutely kills it when he gets to the line. And he's always going to be a threat to be a double-double guy because you know he's able to give you the 10 to 13 rebounds on any given night. Now, here's my criticism with that. So obviously it's not a one-to-one comparison. Kyle Filipowski's not going to get this many touches to get to those types of stat lines where we're all of a sudden making those types of production comparisons. That's just not going to be, I don't think, what happens in the NBA as he stands right now. So if he's a high volume, low efficiency player, and that sort of translates to a smaller sample size to where it looks even worse, the numbers look even worse because he's not getting the same amount of touches, what does that mean for the NBA team drafting him? Like, I think what Mark said in that Twitter exchange was exactly right. It's not just going to be about fit for the team that drafts him. It's also going to be about role, right? And what does that role look like for him? How do NBA teams get him involved in the right ways to where he's able to replicate a lot of this without feeding him, 14, 15, 16, whatever, however many shots it's going to take in a game for him to put up the type of numbers that he's putting up. Like, what's a 19 and 14 going to look like for him in the NBA? Is it going to look like that off like 8 to 10 field goal attempts? Does he have to be like 18 to 20 field goal attempts? Like, what does that have to look like? So that's my biggest concern around his game, is that I'm not sold on the any sort of star aspect for him, which is why I think anybody ranking him in as a top 10 or top 12 pick, for example, that's rich for my blood right now.
Yeah, I agree.
But so I just laid out one hell of a conundrum for our listeners to ponder about. But is that sort of where your mind goes when we talk about some of the weaknesses and or concerns with his game?
Yeah, where I start to really scare myself off with him is just like, what are the bets I'd rather take? Because if I'm right about Kyle Filipowski, let's say I love Kyle Filipowski and I end up being right about Kyle Filipowski, like, is he like a top 15 center in the NBA? Like, if everything
is he even a center in the NBA?
Do you feel comfortable with him? How many fours, like starting caliber fours, do you feel comfortable with him defending in the NBA? Like, there just start to be a lot of questions where it's just
fit,
I don't
role,
know.
scheme.
It gets really uncomfortable. Really,
it's got to be a little too perfect, right?
It does. It does. But like you mentioned, Joel Embiid, who was like a 63% shooter on twos in college.
Much more dominant, right?
So that's the thing, is it's like, so we're already seeing these massive efficiency woes in college. Like on his twos against Xavier, 3 for 8 against a team with like 2 legit bigs that you can throw at him. Against Kansas, 5 for 12 against a small Kansas team that like play a 6'7" guy at center for most of the time. 4 for 10 against USC upstate. Like, you can't be doing.
You got to be better. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that to me is like where I start to be like, because I mentioned this in the group chat. I did like a hasty board where I was just like, snap decision, this guy or this guy, and he ended up around like 28 on that board. Just because I think at a certain point, like there are so many guys where I'd rather be like, look, this might be a total disaster and they might not be trustworthy players to the extent that Filipowski can be at times. But like, the upside is just way too big. Like, we just talked about Anthony Black, who like super trustworthy player, wild tools, like crazy upside. But you can get lower, and they're guys that aren't that trustworthy, that are a little bit more of projects, and figuring out where to slot Filipowski in that area when you're not doing a board for a specific team can be a little bit difficult.
So how many Duke prospects are you taking over Filipowski as it stands? Because this is a very fluid conversation, right? I'm definitely still taking Dariq Whitehead ahead of him. Dariq may very well drop a little bit on my next big board update, just purely because of the circumstances, and we've seen other guys, and Dariq could eventually make his way back up to number 3 where I had him preseason, but I think it's going to take a little while for that to possibly manifest itself. But we've seen Derek Lively really struggle. Mark Mitchell's he's been out there a little bit. Now, Tyrese Proctor, I think Tyrese Proctor woke up in the second half of that Kansas game that I talked about a little bit with Steven, and even in today's game against Purdue. Proctor was able to score 16 points, 3 assists to 1 turnover, 7 of 13 from the floor. The shooting still isn't coming around for him from range, but he's able to get into some of those mid-range pull-ups and really make defenses pay for not staying glued to his hip all the time when he has the ball. How many Duke prospects are you taking over Kyle Filipowski?
Yeah, so on that board, I had Derek, and I had Derek Lively. And I know you said that he's struggling, but he has an effective field goal percentage of 69.2. I mean, this guy. No, I am extremely concerned.
You mean
about,
everything that's a dunk he can do?
Yeah,
We got it.
Derek
Two-hand
Lively,
throwdown. We got it.
Yeah, Derek Lively and his 3.2 points per game are very much starting to worry me. It's like the person who is most.
I think we're angry about it, right? To an extent, like we
I'm
have
mad.
a little bit of anger. Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm not even disappointed anymore. I'm actually upset at Derek Lively. And like it's just like the mentality between him and Filipowski is so clearly different. Like Filipowski will look to punish a mismatch, and it's not always the cleanest thing. Sometimes he does have to get his own rebound and do it a second time, but like Lively doesn't. Like you could put a 5'7" point guard on Derek Lively, and I'm not certain that he would call for the ball in the post at this stage. Like it is really frustrating.
You know what's really interesting about Derek Lively? So I was listening to the Low Post. Actually, I was listening to a portion of it today, where I believe it was Mike Prada that was on. They were talking about the Washington Wizards, and Mike was talking about how he's loathing Daniel Gafford's existence right now at the backup center spot. He was going through all the different reasons why, Daniel Gafford seemed like a great player, and he's bounced around a few teams, but it seems like wherever he's gone, he's put up efficient production. He's always been like a good PER center when he's played the minutes for it, right? But you take a look at some of the things he's not good at or that he's not currently giving that team, sounds like Derek Lively. And that concerns me. So we're going to talk about taking
the last
this guy.
Comparison you want when you're talking about somebody that has that level of ability and expectation.
Yeah, both of them are freak athletes, right? Both of them, when they're at their best, they absolutely can impact the game on the glass. They can block shots. They can get up off the ground 1 feet, 2 feet. They can hammer down with whatever type of dunk you want them to hammer down. But the things that they don't do, or when they aren't at their best and they are only playing limited minutes, it's funny how similar those two guys can be. And when we look at taking somebody like Lively in the lottery, right? When we talk about using that type of pick on him, and then bigs already develop at a slow pace as it is. So you get to the 3-4 year mark where all of a sudden you got to pay this guy an extension and you have to give him real money in the NBA. What does that contract look like? And are you happy handing that type of contract out? Or are you much more willing to let him go to another team? Or even when you are the team that acquires him, maybe you acquire him before that 4-year window's up and you have to be the one thinking about giving him an extension. Like, are you handing out that bag of money if we're not seeing the type of game that we thought we were going to be getting from somebody like a Derek Lively? And those conversations, I know it's a little deep as to what we do here, focusing on like college basketball, but like these are the questions we ask in June, right?
Yep. But when that's the thing, is like when we're making boards, like I try to put myself in that mindset. Like when I'm submitting my board for a composite, like that's the stuff you have to think about is, do you want to take this guy where these are the type of questions you have? And then 4 years from now, if you're seeing flashes, but you still have those questions, and then you have to commit to a guy for potentially 5 years after that, like, what do you do? What do you do? Would you rather just take somebody else? And yeah, the Derek Lively experiment has been probably the most frustrating development of this draft cycle for me. Because the tools are outrageous. Like the fact that he has the shooting ability he does, and he's not displaying it at all. And the fact that even like as a passer, like the game against Delaware, he used his length in so many interesting ways to create for his teammates. And even that, like, it's just not there. Like there is zero assertiveness from him. And there's times defensively where he looks awesome. Like he's switching on to smaller guys and he's doing really well. And there's other times where he just has a traditional big on him. And it's like, oh, you're going to like get eaten alive in those games. And I think
he's just too weak right now. Like, we talked about it. That's just what it is.
And I think there's like an over-reliance of people to be like, oh, well, like Jokic and Embiid like destroy everybody. And it's like they do, but like Ivica Zubac doesn't destroy everybody, but he can destroy you if he wants to. And like that's where you start to worry about somebody like Derek Lively.
Yeah, and it's not just the Zach Edey's of the world destroying Derek Lively. It's all these other big men that he just can't He can't box out. He can't get around. Like these are real issues. And when you get to the NBA, like that's great. Derek Lively's 7 feet tall. He's 7'1", but all these other centers, for the most part, they're all like 6'11" to 7'1", 7'2". So how many of these guys are you actually going to be jumping over to get all of your rebounds, to get all of your block shots? Like eventually you're going to have to be able to hold your ground and actually have the lower body strength to stay in your stance, right? Guard the post and be able to contest something when any of these guys that we could rattle off go into your body. It's not just about getting up off the ground, off a rotation from the weak side, coming over to block somebody's shot. So that, like, these are real things that we have to think about. So Lively's going to take, he is going to take a tumble on my next board. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it, right? Like,
what are we supposed to do? Like,
because it's funny. We talk about, as I know we're getting a little off topic here, but like we talk as draft evaluators, we're supposed to take into account what's happening right now, but we're also supposed to not dog these guys and really try and project forward as to this is how it is now, but are we still going to be in the same position in May and June when we're making even more updated editions of our big boards? Are we still going to take the same stance, or are these guys going to end up going up right back to where they were preseason? And we have to sort of eat a little bit of crow. Like, I may have moved this guy down a little bit too quickly. In the case of Derek Lively, though, how does this get better this year? I'm really struggling to answer that question. And unless he really sells us on like this ridiculous 5 to 10 minute YouTube highlight reel that he's able to put together, where the highest of highs just look that good to the point where we have him back in the lottery conversation, how else is this really going to change for him? Whereas Kyle Filipowski, I can absolutely see a world now where Kyle Filipowski goes in the top 20 and Derek Lively does not go in the top 20. Now, I still think Dariq Whitehead's going to be their best prospect. I still think he's going to be a top 10 guy. Right now, Kyle Filipowski is their second best prospect for me. Now, if you ask me this question 2 months from now, Tyrese Proctor could actually be that answer. I think he is going to be that answer. I just hesitate with jumping him that far up my board without the production necessarily behind it to make that type of a jump. I need to see a little bit more of the shooting, or I need to see more performances like today where, yeah, he didn't shoot the ball great, but it didn't stop him from getting an efficient 16, 5, and 3. I need to see more.
And he's confident with it too. Like the fact that he had a slow start and he's still like, I'm shooting pull-up threes still. Like I really appreciate that about him.
So if I had to rank them today, I would go Dariq, Kyle Filipowski, Tyrese Proctor, Derek Lively, Mark Mitchell. How would you rank those guys today?
I would go Dariq, Lively, Filipowski, Proctor, Mitchell.
Okay, so I love it. You're still sticking to your guns with Derek Lively.
I am, but like, if you had I would have been stunned if you told me, like, as someone in the Chicagoland area who watches more Northwestern than he should, like, hey, Ryan Young is going to be closing games over Derek Lively at Duke. Like, I never would have believed you. Absolutely never would have believed you. And I can't even say it's the wrong call at times, given the way that Lively's played. But that's where we're at.
All right, this last main guy that we're going to talk about, or really, I shouldn't even say main guy. Like, I think the conversation is going to go by rather quickly on him, and then maybe we'll throw in a few other names at the end. But you mentioned the exercise that you performed, right? Doing the quick hits board, like this guy or that guy, this guy or that guy, just doing a really quick exercise, which is great, by the way. Like, I do those exercises with my board all the time, or any sort of tiers list I'm making. I keep track of all this stuff throughout the year, and I go back and forth with myself constantly as I'm watching all these games. So I think it's great that you actually told the audience that you do that. I think more scouts should absolutely do that more regularly and shouldn't feel bad about switching things up on their boards as they get new information. It can quite literally be a day-to-day process when you're doing all of these things in our space. But you mentioned that exercise. You threw out a name who I knew I wanted to talk about at least a little bit, but then you threw out a ranking for this guy, and I went, oh my God. Like, we've really hit this point. Terrence Arsenault. Maxwell, this is your floor. I want you to tell everybody, what has Terrence Arsenault already done for you, and why should he be a guy? We already tried to call him out preseason, but
Yeah.
now we're in it. Why do people need to be paying more attention to this guy?
So preseason, I had Terrence Arsenault 20 when we got to him when we were covering during the preseason episodes, and it was a big shocking reveal moment. And then in the group text, I got scared. I got a little nervous, tentative. I moved him down when we submitted our first board. I think I still had him in the first, but I definitely moved him down.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did my exercise the other day, he came out at 19. So he is back. He is back in the top 20. Top 20 Terrence is what everybody's calling him now. I am just comfortable betting on the skill set with him. I think what we've already seen is very good. My main concern with him is like the jumper can be a little funky looking at times. Like, so I wasn't positive he was going to shoot it as well as he did in his EYBL games as he did in college. But through 6 games, 36.4 from 3, he's taking 3.7 per game. He's also hitting 61.5% of his twos, which is great. But he's just showing more as a scorer than I anticipated. Like there was a play where he got chased off the line, nice, bam, one dribble pull up, knocked it down. Like that's the type of stuff I was really hoping to see from him, and that I thought was possibly going to send him back to school for another year playing on such a loaded Houston team. But he's just a really wiry athlete. He's really explosive. Defensively, I actually think he's leaving stuff on the table right now, given what he showed in high school. Like his high school stats, even like in EYBL, were nuts.
Which you say that, but this dude came in that Oregon game and created absolute utter chaos and really made the most of it.
So he's got a steal rate over 4, a block rate of 1.4, and that like is lagging behind expectation for me. Like I think he is a better shot blocker, both just traditional, I'm going to spring up and block this, and I'm going to come help and get a block. Like I really think we're going to see him get more comfortable and get more blocks as the year goes along. And he's still not totally consistent, like just 0 for 2 with no points against Kent State yesterday after going for 15 against Oregon.
But 6 rebounds and assists, so he's still finding ways to impact the game, even though he's not scoring.
Yeah. And I do think that there's like definitely a lack of ball skills still, like, and the fact that he's not turning it over to me is like encouraging, even though
he has 1 turnover on the season.
That's it. And he's in a very low usage role, so he's able to do that. But he also only has 2 assists on the season. So like when he is chased off the line, it is a 1 dribble pull up, or I'm going to try to get to the rim and finish. He's not really playmaking much for others. But
no, but I still think that's phenomenal that in 102 minutes played, he has 1 turnover. I think if you give that number to any coach, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, sign me up." I don't know what he's doing on the court.
He's not stupid. He's not going to make mistakes. He's not going to like on offense. He's not a gambler. Like he doesn't do anything on offense where you're like, Terrence, what was that, man? Like he knows how to play within himself. So I think the defense is going to come along. And I think the fact that he's at least showing restraint in areas where he hasn't developed, and he's a great athlete, like that's a guy I'm comfortable betting on. Like I think the feel and defense are there and the shot is there. That, yeah, there are like major gaps in what he needs to develop to be like a complete offensive player or even close to one. But just from a raw tool and production and feel standpoint, I feel comfortable putting my chips down on him. Like that is a skill set that I think is going to round out real nicely.
I'm not there. Not there yet.
Yeah.
But what I will say to anybody out there in the audience, I don't think it's crazy. And the reason why I don't think it's crazy is NBA teams are always looking for these really easy plug and play complementary pieces who are athletic enough, who can guard multiple positions, who don't make mistakes. They are looking for guys to be able to plug in the lineup who they know, well, at least he's not going to do X, Y, and Z, but he has the potential to give me X, Y, and Z. And that's really the whole pitch behind an off-ball player like Terrence Arsenault. He's not cooking anybody, hitting all these step-back jumpers or doing anything real fancy. But the things that he is doing on the floor when he's getting the minutes, I think has he only played one game over 20 minutes this year so far. Yep. So like he's not even playing a significant role in this team, but we're already talking about him as a prospect. That should just tell everybody something right off the bat, that these guys who are in these bench roles, we're not always talking about them as prospects. The fact that we are talking about somebody like him as a real prospect, that should speak volumes in and of itself. So I do like Terrence Arsenault. I liked him in the preseason process. I wasn't where you were, but like we had conversations about him. We're like, yeah, this is probably going to be one of our guys for this draft cycle. And lo and behold, he comes out. He had a great game against Oral Roberts, that Oregon game that everybody could watch in the playback. Like he's had some moments now against some not terribly awful teams. And Houston's going to play a good schedule. They're in the American. There are more threats, I think, in the American than people realize, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Shoot, there are some real threats in there. So they will have, I should say, will have some good opportunities to keep proving himself. And I don't think that Coach Sampson will just say, this is your only role you're going to have this year. I think he's a fair coach who, if you earn that type of responsibility, I think you're going to get it. And I think Arsenault has a real shot to certainly earn more and be able to do more as the year goes on. So keep Terrence Arsenault's name on your watch list as somebody to really see creeping up a few boards. Okay, two guys that I'll just throw out really quickly who I think deserve a little bit of mention here, and then I think you might have a few names for me as well. Yeah. So Julian Phillips for Tennessee. Corey, I'm starting to see a little more of it. So Tennessee had a great game. First of all, they had a great run in the battle for Atlantis. They actually won the battle for Atlantis. They beat Kansas. They beat, for my eyes, Maxwell, I think Kansas, to me, looks like the best team in college basketball. Just from what I've seen my eye test, they were able to knock off that team. In a game against USC, Julian Phillips had 25 points, 8 rebounds, looked really good doing it, was incredibly efficient, was really solid defensively. I like these guys who are willing to do a little bit of everything on the floor. And as Corey has talked to us about in our No Ceilings chat, just a complimentary wing who can just give you a little bit of everything, has good size, has great athleticism. These are the types of players that NBA teams will always look for. I get it. Brother, better than 9% from three-point range. That has to come around, though. Like the non-shooting, to me, that prevents me from just being like, okay, you can now automatically be top 25 on my board because you meet X, Y, and Z criteria.
It definitely does need to come around, but if you were to be like, hey, Julian Phillips is going to struggle with one thing out of the gate, what do you want it to be? I would say shooting, because that's like kind of what he was known for before. So I think you hope that it turns around, and I don't think you're like crazy going out on a limb if you were to be like, yes, it will. The fact that he's being efficient on twos, the fact that he's like playing as good a defense. I was a little lower on the defense with this high school film. I thought he could be a little stiff at times and a little slow at the point of attack. So like he's a really good vertical athlete. I just wasn't wild about him laterally. So I think,
but he's been better. He's been a lot better.
I think the fact that that's like clearly come along, whether it's just physical changes or just he's growing up or whatever, like it's really good. And he's getting to the line a ton. Like he's playing with a real aggressiveness and using the fact that he can like elevate and be a threat inside the arc and around the basket. Like it's really good. His passing is further along than I expected to. Like I'm really liking it. I just need to see him start making shots. Like, but that's a guy, given his high school reputation, I think he gets some of the benefit of the doubt. Where to me, this is a guy where even if he hits like 33%, it's like, I'm willing to give a little bit of a pass on that.
And then one last quick shout out, a player who his team's going to have some opportunities this week against some good, solid teams. I believe Notre Dame plays Michigan State on Wednesday night, and they have another good game this weekend that I think they might. Do they play Syracuse? So they play another good
Saturday.
Team.
Saturday
They play Syracuse. Yep. So going up against another guard that you and I both like in Judah Mintz. Don't look now. JJ Starling. If you want to watch a fun prospect game, if you have some time to kill, Notre Dame against Bowling Green was a fun watch from a JJ Starling perspective. This guy went 23 points on 10 of 11 shooting from the floor. He's hitting 46% of his shots from the field, 36% of his shots from three-point range. He's still not acting as the lead playmaker that Blake Wesley was for his team last year, but nevertheless, as a combo guard, JJ Starling is starting to fill it up for Notre Dame. So I think people need to pay attention a little bit to him this week in these two games. We'll see if we want to talk about him a little more after these two games and what he can show us. But those are my two quick call-outs for the week. Maxwell, who are some of your call-outs for the week?
Yeah, so real quick, I want to touch on a guy that sometimes you make a mistake as an evaluator. And I had Nathan tell me no less than 75 times before the start of the season, you got to check out these Oregon State guys. And I watched the Oregon State Duke game, and man,
They gave him fits, dude.
Yeah, they did. And Jordan Pope can really play. Like, he is 6'2" guard, which, things are going away from that a little bit, but he is so good. I think he's like a potential exception. He might not be a this year guy, but he is efficient as a scorer. He is pulling up. He is fearless. Really good assist to turnover ratio so far. I just love his confidence and how he was like taking stuff in the mid range, like the whole bag of like everything you want from a point guard who is 6'2" is all there with him. And like, as that game went on, I just felt like more and more like I was paying more attention to Pope than anybody else on the court. He's not the best when it comes to separation. Hitting tough ones is still something that I'd like to see just come along a little bit with him, but his hands on defense and just his mid-range and 3-point scoring, really, really good. Really,
he plays the game like a grown-up, doesn't he?
He does. It was a very mature performance. And then another guy on a similar note, but opposite end of the spectrum, that I'm going to throw out there is Jaron Holmes from Iowa State. They really pushed UNC, got the upset win over them. He's a 5th-year guy, so we're not talking draft. We're talking Portsmouth with this guy. This is a guy that like I love the Portsmouth guys.
Where's the Rich Eisen fucking playoffs or what? Are we talking draft or what?
Yeah. So this is a guy that I think has a shot to like. It would have to be the long road. Like, it's gonna have to, like, graduate players just don't get drafted. Like, I think it's gonna be kind of a surprise if we see one taken. But this is a guy that I could see like just eventually getting there to the NBA level. He is just a really nice player. Defensively, he knows where to funnel guys. Like, he knows the scouting report really well. Keeps guys out of the middle well when they were running that sort of a setup. Strong body, really good pace and hesitation, was hitting threes off the dribble, can use some misdirection to get where he wants to go on the court, has a floater game. Just a nice, mature player. It's 6'4", which is like, that's kind of what teams are looking for as far as guards go now. Like, they want guys that are over 6'3", and he has that. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a long, winding road for him if he gets there. But I think he's certainly a guy who like warrants consideration. And if you're somebody who pays close attention in the draft and like you're talking about putting together a top 100 at some point, even if it's just for fun as an exercise, like, he's a guy I think you need to check out at a certain point during this season.
Iowa State plays UConn in a big game. Mm-hmm. If you're listening to this pod, you will have already hopefully seen the game, but Maxwell and I will be able to watch that tonight. I think I will try and stay up for at least a portion of it. Really, really interesting Iowa State team. I want to watch that name a little closer, Maxwell.
Yeah.
I definitely do.
Well, Caleb Grill was hitting like every single shot on earth. Like,
what
Caleb
did he have?
Grill,
like, how many threes that was like 7 threes or something crazy
he was
like
7
that?
for 11 or something at some point. It was absurd like that. But he had some nice plays defensively. Like, he had himself a game. Like, that is not a guy we'll probably ever say his name on this podcast again. But boy, did he have a game against UNC.
Last but not least, UCLA's Jalen Clark. If you haven't checked him out, please go check out Jalen Clark. I can assure you we will be talking about him on a future episode of this podcast. So if I had to give out one homework assignment for the listeners this week, go watch Jalen Clark. Go watch that UCLA Pepperdine game. Go watch the UCLA Illinois. Like, go watch some of those performances. This man is guarding everybody he needs to on the floor. He's leading UCLA in scoring and rebounding as a 6'5" guard, junior. He's experienced. He's tough as nails. He's playing the game the right way. He's probably going to be a top 45 guy on a lot of draft boards, so go check him out. But that being said, that's going to do it for tonight's episode of Draft Deeper. Certainly, Maxwell, can't thank you enough. You and I, every time we get together for a podcast, that's why you're a co-host here, man. We always have so much fun. So tell everyone where they can find you and what are they getting in the prospect overview this week. I know Anthony Black, but maybe even besides Anthony Black.
Yeah, so Anthony Black was kind of the big surprise name that ended up being somebody that came up. So he's going to get a lot of coverage. You're going to get a lot of other Maui coverage. You're going to get some deep cuts as you're accustomed to. You're getting some Tucker DeVries victory lap material.
Boy, here we go.
You're getting some Taron Armstrong. You're getting some Darren Williams, the kid at Nevada that's like blowing up analytics charts. Spoiler alert, he's fine. I'm not like blown away yet. But I mean, all the Maui and PK games were consumed. So a lot of stuff, a lot of names to touch on there. So you're getting a smorgasbord, another feast of college hoops content.
Feast Week Part 2, courtesy of Maxwell's writing, as well as my writing. And you can find him on Twitter at Boundboards. You can follow me on Twitter at Draft Deeper. Make sure you read the Morning Dunk as this podcast is coming out. Make sure you're following myself, as well as No Ceilings NBA, for any content updates from myself, from Maxwell, from all of us at the No Ceilings Collective. Make sure you're subscribed to this podcast feed, wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Subscribe, rate, review, do all of those fun things. Subscribe to the Substack, NoCeilingsNBA.com, for our daily writing. We are pumping out anywhere from 5 to 6 pieces a week, so please go tune in if you want more excellent draft coverage all year round. But that is going to do it for this episode. Until we meet again on this very podcast feed, thank you all for listening, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.